All right, so certainly one of the most famous events to happen in the civil rights movement is the Selma March. So we'll talk about that now. Now we will be watching the movie in class, so hopefully you can, have all of this information in mind as you're watching the movie, because it'll sort of help you understand the whole thing in a more historically accurate sense. So in 1965, MLK and the SCLC had organized, or they wanted to organize a new voter registration campaign, similar to the Freedom Summer that SNCC had been doing, but they wanted to do this one in Selma, which is in Alabama, because they wanted to put pressure on the federal government to pass a new Voting Rights Act. Remember, we've moved on now from segregation, and everyone's focus is on voting. So SNCC had actually been in Selma already doing work with voter registration, and they did not really get along with the SCLC. They usually felt like the SCLC was just coming in and taking over, and that they were going to get all the credit because they had Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy, and they felt like they usually got brushed over. So they were really resistant at first to the SCLC coming in to help, but ultimately they do decide to work together. So King wanted to organize a march from Selma to Montgomery, which is the capital of Alabama. And this is going to be, a 2-day march. This is very long. So they set out on day one. It's a Sunday. And this is the first march, actually, or this is going to be multiple marches because it's not going to all happen on the first try. So they set out on this Sunday, and they cross this bridge. I think it's called the Edmund Pettus Bridge. They cross this bridge, and when they get to the edge of the bridge, the sheriff, who you see here on the left, Jim Clark and the Alabama State Troopers are standing at the edge, and they basically, without a word, he orders the state troopers to essentially charge the marchers. There are children in this march, okay, the women, elderly. This is a group of peaceful people just marching down the side of the road. They're not in the road, they're on the sidewalk. And there's footage of this, okay, that all of this had been filmed by the press. And so there's actual footage of this that you can watch, and it's really traumatizing. And he orders them, with dogs and everything, to attack the marchers, and they were tear gassed, and it was just absolutely awful. They were beaten on national television, okay, and that day is known as Bloody Sunday. It was just really awful. 2 days later, they decide that they will try again. So they actually had court order saying not to do it by that point. Alabama had been trying to stop the march from happening, but MLK decides that he wants to do it anyway. So he goes, and they march again. They get to the edge of the bridge, and they see the police again. And this time, we're not really sure what exactly happened, but MLK turns around and he starts walking back. And I guess he decided, just kidding. Today's not the day. We don't have it all worked out yet. This could easily turn into another violent situation. So that day is known as Turnaround Tuesday. That was on the 9th. So they turn around, they go back, they sort of regroup, and, over a week or so later, on March 22nd of 1965, they finally march and set out to Montgomery. And so when they get to Montgomery the next day, it's like a total party outside the Capitol. Everybody's so happy that it went off without a hitch. And now they had marched from Selma to Montgomery, but you got to get people home now back to Selma. So they had people driving shuttles from Montgomery, from the sort of the city center to the Montgomery airport. And one of the women driving those shuttles was this white woman you see on the bottom right, Viola Liuzzo, who was a activist in the civil rights movement. She was from the North, and she was a member or a volunteer for the SCLC, and she had been driving this shuttle, and she had several black passengers in her car. She's taking them out to the airport, and then she was run off the road by the KKK. The KKK got out of their car, walked up to hers, and shot her and killed her. She is the only white woman killed during the entire civil rights movement, which is definitely unique, and it sort of takes all of this, which had already been all over TV, a huge national thing. It sort of takes it to a new level, and we're seeing the violence now is spreading continuously, even in the face of all of this nonviolent protest that's been going on. So ultimately, with the Freedom Summer and Selma, we do see the passage and signing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which bans literacy tests and also places federal officers at polling stations so that African Americans can feel safe to go to the polling place and go vote. We also are going to pass the 24th Amendment, which bans the poll tax. So registered voters, because of these two things, the amount of registered black voters in the South is actually going to go from 7% to 70% over the next 20 years, which is a huge increase. But nevertheless, we're still going to see the increasing of racial tensions in places all over the country, not just in the South, during this whole civil rights movement. And there were multiple, huge race riots. The largest one, though, was the Watts riot. So Watts is a neighborhood in Los Angeles, not necessarily a very good neighborhood, but the Watts riots is one of the worst riots in American history. It lasted for several days, violence, looting, arson. Ultimately, they had to call in the California National Guard to install martial law and a curfew. It's just absolute chaos. And this won't be the last thing to happen. In the summer of 1967, there were race riots in Newark, New Jersey, and in Detroit. The race riot in Detroit was absolutely massive. 43 people died in the Detroit riot, and they caused over $50 million worth of property damage. So before these race riots, most of the violence associated with the civil rights movement had been white racists trying to keep black citizens either, what they say is quote unquote in their place, whether that means not voting or in a segregated system. But now the violence is black people attacking police officers and white businesses in black neighborhoods. So we're seeing the violence spread into ways that do not, fit with the message of the movement. And it's really starting to give the movement more of a bad light. And it's helping the opposition to say, look, this is why we should have these things, because things are out of control or the whole movement is bad. It's just easy to associate the entire movement with chaos when things like this happen. I'm sure that you can relate that to things like the Black Lives Matter movement. When we see riots and things like that happened in Baltimore or Ferguson, things like that, we usually now associate the whole movement with negativity because of a few isolated incidences. So the federal government decides to do a huge investigation into what is causing all of this, all of these riots and all of this violence. So they form something called the Kerner Commission. LBJ forms the Kerner Commission, and the technical name for the Kerner Commission is the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. So they do this whole investigation and they publish this super long report. And basically what it says is that long-term racial discrimination is the cause of the violence. Big freaking shocker. If you continuously oppress a group of people, eventually they will lash out. And they recommended new federal funding and programs to improve the quality of urban areas and areas with a large percentage of black residents. And ultimately, a lot of other people in the government argued that this was just rewarding the rioters. Now, there's a fair argument to be made there. Do you cut Watts a huge check to improve the city when they just destroyed the city? So, what do you do here? Do you try to improve the lives of those people and make sure this doesn't happen again, and risk it looking like violence wins? Or do you just allow the problem to continue? So LBJ doesn't really do either. He doesn't really follow up on any of the recommendations. He just sort of lets this fizzle out. And a lot of that is because by the time this happens, it's 1968, and the Vietnam War is entering a new phase of escalation, and that is taking up the majority of his attention.